Good morning, guys. It's O'Neill Anderson here, Chief Market Analyst at GlobalForex. And in this video, I just want to go through a request that was made by one of our Signal subscribers, or clients rather. Um, I've actually been asked to just to go through what are my thoughts on the USD-CAD as well as oil prices, crude oil. Now, there's a few things here to take into consideration when you are trading a commodity currency. As I've always said before, always before you trade, make sure that you understand what are the driving factors behind the strength of a particular currency. So in this case here, we do know that in the regards of USD CAD, we should be focusing or primarily be focusing on the USD CAD, right? Now, what we've seen in the past week, or not rather not in this past week, but weeks prior to this week here, we did actually have a trade on the oil, and the oil trade was mainly because of the crude oil inventories that we have seen coming out. Now, I did not send a signal regarding oil as well as USD CAD. I recall that I did actually have a brief explanation on our private signals network as to what I was actually looking for or my reasons behind taking a trade on crude oil. Now, what we do know is that um, on Wednesday, on the 15th of July, right? So we had a fundamental release there. We've seen that at 4:30 p.m., right? We had crude oil inventories coming out. Now we have seen that figure. The forecast was a decline of 1.3 million, but then we've actually had a decline of 7.5 million, right? Now, a common mistake that traders make is that whenever they look at the economic calendar and they see a number being positive or negative, they always assume that a positive number is going to be good for that particular currency or commodity price, whereas a negative number will actually be, or rather a decline or a decreased number compared to your previous and your forecast is actually going to be negative for a particular currency as well as commodity or particular commodity price. And that is not the case. What we've seen here, the forecast on crude oil was negative 1.3 million, whereas the actual value that came out at 4:30 p.m. South African time was actually negative 7.5. Now, this is a positive, it does have a positive effect on the US dollar, but it largely impacts the Canadian dollar. This is strictly due to, we can't overlook the sizable energy sector of Canada. We do know that Canada is a huge exporter of crude oil. Now, this does obviously have an effect on the USD as well. Now, if you just look at the basic principles, right? If you look at the flow of money, always remember, guys, always follow the flow of money when it comes to exports. Don't always follow where the goods or services are being rendered at or being exported to. You always want to follow the flow of money, right? Now, if Canada, right, if they are a huge exporter of oil, meaning that they supply various countries with oil, right? In this case, let's look at strictly the United States. So if Canada actually supplies the United States with oil, that simply means that the reason why that has an effect on the US dollar, or rather, let's just stick to the Canadian dollar at first, right? So for US to purchase oil, right, from Canada, they first have to convert the US dollar to Canadian dollars, right? And that obviously that creates about a demand in Canadian dollars, right? So the more oil that they are actually exporting, it does actually cause a increase in the demand of the Canadian dollar in this particular case, right? Now, if that actually increases the strength of the Canadian dollar, then it obviously is going to weaken the strength of the US dollar relative to the Canadian dollar, right? Now, taking into regard the the crude oil inventories. Crude oil inventories are basically, it's a change in the number of barrels of crude oil held in inventory by commercial firms during the past week. Now we've seen this number here having a huge decline from a 5.7 million to a negative 7.5 million, and the forecast was actually negative 1.3 million, right? Now, what this basically means is that the supply, right? So you have a decrease in supply, right? Now, a decrease in supply is basically, it is positive for the Canadian dollar because then it just creates about more demand, right? So if there's a deficiency of supply of oil, right, then you can expect a increase in demand, and we do know that if there's an increase in demand, then we do have or price should then increase, right? Now, if you're looking at your chart here, right, you're looking at a hourly chart on the USDCAD, but let's just look at the US oil, right? This is crude oil. Let's remember to switch over to the US oil chart. You'll see this move much more clear, right? Now, what you have here, I'm looking at the USD oil, right? What you can see here in the USD oil is that if you go to the time that that economic event was released, we know that it was actually released at 4:30 p.m. Now, it would be preferably that I prefer looking at a 30-minute time frame in this case, just to get that exact candlestick of when that fundamental news actually came out, right? Now, if you look here, okay, my trading view is actually lagging a bit. Now, if you look as to when that event came out, as I've mentioned before, it was actually released at 4:30 p.m. on the 15th of July, right? Now, if you look here on our chart, where's the 15th of July, right? So at this candle here, right? Let me just zoom in here a bit. So what we can see that on the 15th of July at 4:30 p.m. South African time, you had this huge bull candle here. You had a bit of a correction here. So you had a lot of liquidity at this specific point here, as well as corresponds to the support here. And you have huge liquidity, various areas of liquidity here. And then you can see that price actually went up, right? But if you're looking at, let's just look at the CADJPY for a moment. Let me just switch over to a hourly time frame, or before I go to an hourly time frame, now you can see on the CADJPY the way that the ideal currency pair that you want to trade here is you want to look at the strongest currency of the day, so the strongest and the weakest of the day, right? So on the 15th, the preferred currency pair that you want to trade the Canadian dollar against with was the JPY. Now we have seen in this previous week that you did have some fundamentals on the JPY. We've had the Bank of Japan in interest rates, but we've seen that has actually remained unchanged. Now look at this candle here, right? This huge bull candle here to the upside. We can see that um, at the release of those fundamentals, you actually had CAD increase in strength relative to the JPY. See, we hardly even have a week here to the downside here, right? And we've seen price has actually broken through the support here at 78.95, and price is currently what seems to be it's bouncing off of the support here, right? But we can see that price is mainly moving sideways, right? So I will be focusing on this range here, right? And I'll be looking to trade a breakout, right? can see that the market is pushing down. So I am looking for price to actually get back down to this resistance point that it has broken before. But I'm not going to focus that much on the USD, on the CADJPY. Let's just look at the USDCAD, right? I'll just switch over to an hourly time frame on the USDCAD as well. So you guys, you always want to align your fundamentals with your technicals, right? So now looking at the USDCAD, I'm looking at the hourly time frame. I think I'm just gonna go to a much more higher time frame just to reduce the noise there. I'll just go to a 4 hourly time frame on the USDCAD. Now remember that on your economic calendar, right? If you're looking at that particular crude oil inventories event that was released on the 15th of July, right? We see that the currency it has an impact on is the US dollar, but always remember that you want to look at oil, just isolate oil relative to other currencies, right? We do know that Canada is a huge exporter of oil because they have a huge energy sector, right? So what we can see here is that you have this area of support right over here, right? So we have this area of support, right? Now always remember that if you looking at USD CAD, if oil prices go up, remember I said that that actually increases the strength of the Canadian dollar. And if you're looking at this particular chart, it's always going to be a invert or a inverse move, right? Strictly because what the movements that you see here, right, is the strength of your base currency, which is the US dollar, relative to your code or quotient currency, which is the Canadian dollar. So obviously, if the Canadian dollar is actually getting stronger, you'll see this chart actually going down, right? Because if the CAD is getting stronger, that automatically means that the US dollar is getting weaker relative to the Canadian dollar, right? It's not relative, not the US dollar getting weaker relative to other currencies, strictly um, against the Canadian dollar, right? Now you can see this candle here. You had price actually push here down. Now, if you recall correctly, that you actually had price push up on the CAD JPY, whereas in this case here you have price pushing down to the support, right? So what I am looking for here, right, you can see we are clearly at a support. You see you have this huge bullish engulfing candlestick formation here. So that's the first thing that I look for on my higher time frames, or not the first thing rather, but it's one thing that I've seen here. And if I just go down to a lower time frame, right, I just want to focus on that, on this particular retest of that support, right? What we can see here is that if I look at my EMAs, we can see that the blue EMA has just crossed over the orange EMA. So potentially we could be having a market, a bull market sentiment, right? And what we can also see is that as price was actually here at this support level here, right? You can see you had a decrease in your volume, right? So what I get from this is that you basically have people that already, or traders and investors already went short, and they are actually bailing out on their positions, or they are trailing their profits, and their stops are being hit and they are out of the trades, and they are actually collecting some of their profits, or they're partially closing some of their trades, right? So that's why we have this decrease in volume here, in my opinion, right? But what I am expecting a increase in volume here, right? So I'm expecting the market to potentially head further up. Now remember, we had the USDCHF as well as the dollar index, the US dollar index, or currency strength index. And we said that we are looking for a retest of that trend line that's joining the two necklines. So we are actually looking for a pullback in the strength of the dollar before we actually enter USDCHF, before we enter a long trade, right? So an ideal point to enter this trade here, if you have a much more higher risk tolerance, then you can actually enter probably around the retest of the support here. Or to be much more safer, I'd be looking for price to get above 1.353 before I actually consider long entries on the USD CAD. But at the moment, that is basically what you want to focus on when you trading the CAD. And always remember, guys, that in this week we've seen that it's earning season. So remember that banks are a huge driving factor um, towards the strength of a particular country's currency, right? So I will actually be looking for, never mind this descending channel that you drew in here. So I will be looking for price to actually break through what seems to be resistance here before I actually look for long entries. And we can see here that price has actually been gradually moving to the downside, actually bouncing off this descending trend line here. But as soon as we got that news, then we actually had this huge candle here to the downside. Now it is possible that the market could possibly correct here, so you might have a retracement there back into this descending channel. And then we can see price potentially continuing in its move in within this channel here to the downside. But if we're looking at the long run, we never know what the next crude oil inventories economic data might be. But I highly believe that it will be a positive reading. Now when I say a positive reading, I don't mean in terms of that actual value that is going to be released on your economic calendar, but I'm looking for a further decline in supply, right? Ultimately boosting demand, and we can expect the Canadian dollar to get much more stronger than what it is now, or for oil prices to rise much more further. But before that, with the USD, with the CAD JPY, I'm looking for a break of that consolidation area that I've highlighted earlier on before actually looking for short trades, right? So that is what I'm currently focusing on the USD CAD. From a fundamental perspective, that's what I'm looking at here. Now, if price does actually break above, this is the CAD JPY, um, should it happen that price breaks above this resistance here, right? Then we're definitely heading to this swing high here at 79.542. But at the moment, I'm looking for a correction here to the downside here, right? So you see that you have this distribution area here. So